Welcome to Successfully Ambiguous, the podcast that guides professionals through the changing world so you can find your own way and your own path to your success. One of the things that has surprised me about the more I get to know about what happens south of the border in marketing, our American neighbors have so much data available. And as a marketer, I'd love that. As a citizen, I'm a little afraid of that. Information privacy and the policies and the processes and just the way we operationalize those processes is becoming more and more important.
Absolutely. Excellent observation. It's driving so many facets of life. It's how governments operate. It's how businesses function and scale and thrive. And it's how people communicate and express themselves, even through social and mobile and channels like this. But in America, it's a different culture. And that's one of the core messages that I convey in class in information privacy at York is that privacy fundamentally is a cultural conception. How you feel about your personal data, how it's treated, collected, used, really derives from your age, your gender, your ethnicity, your life experiences, of course, but in many ways where you came from. And we have a certain North American conception of it. And even within that, Mexico, US, Canada look at it differently. And in the US in particular, it's a free market democracy. It's very commercially oriented. It's money culture. So there's more of a preference given to innovation and to the ability of individuals and businesses to succeed in a data-driven economy. So they're less inclined to erect things like regulations or hard laws that might restrict that or prevent it in certain ways. By stark contrast to Europe, where its privacy is in fact data protection defined as a fundamental human right under law. So in Europe, it's an entirely different culture. It's looking at privacy and data as an essential underpinning of a functioning democracy where businesses don't rule as much, but the people at least theoretically do.
Well, and brings us to another thing that listeners might want to think about their careers. You're working in several different countries at once and several different manifestations of privacy, right? You run a business out of the United States, you teach for us here in Canada, you work with a data privacy organization in is it Brussels?
I do. That's one of my clients the largest digital advertising organization in Europe, the European Interactive Digital Advertising Alliance.
So I think we have a lot to gain from understanding how different cultures view privacy, but also technology. At graduation, you and I had conversations about our programs, but also ran into our cybersecurity instructor who would like to get you and him in a room with a bunch of students and the population to talk about where these things intersect and how they should intersect.
Absolutely. It's a great point. There's a strong intersection here. I mean, we in privacy cannot accomplish what we need to, which is protecting the personal information of individuals, no matter where they're located in the world. We can't do that without strong security controls. And security is a discipline that's far more vast. It's looking at all types of assets, not just personal information, but proprietary information, sensitive, confidential, military, security, whatever oriented but sensitive information that is. It's a very broad landscape. In privacy, we're concerned solely about the personal, and we can't do that without security controls. If there's not security in place, there's probably going to be a privacy harm of some kind, a breach or a compromise or some misuse. So I'm always interested in speaking and working with my cybersecurity colleagues.
Excellent. So one of the things we try to do on this podcast is to leave people with some practical advice that they can apply in their daily lives or in their businesses. Are there things you think that Canadian businesses should be thinking about information privacy that they're not?
Well, I think, it starts with a fundamental that every business should be well aware of, which is listen to your customers. Listen to what they say. They're a lot more digitally literate than you probably think. They have expectations and preferences when it comes to their personal data. They're not inclined to not engage with you, but unless you treat that data relationship respectfully, there's going to be a major violation of trust. And that's the central foundation of privacy, really. If I had to distill it to one word, it's trust, especially for an organization. You can build on that. Your business will thrive on that if you treat it appropriately. So you ask for permission before you collect personal information. You're clear and transparent about what you're doing with it, so that the individual is comfortable and aware, and you don't diverge from that. You don't ask to use it for one purpose and then use it for another without telling them. You can do that, but not without asking them permission first. So it's these sorts of general courtesy, I would say, but they're now codified into principles of practice and even legal requirements here in Canada and around the world that you must observe, or you'll get in trouble. And you certainly You just certainly don't want to be liable for anything. You don't want to hear from the privacy commissioner unless it's a friendly holiday greeting. But you don't want to be in trouble with the regulators. And you certainly, most importantly, don't want to violate the trust of the consumers you serve.
Absolutely. Once trust is lost, it's really hard to get back. And consequently, it's as an employer, I look to my staff to also understand how important that trust of the client is, right? It's important that we see everybody operating in a very transparent but thoughtful manner with people's personal information.
Yes, transparency is the key. You've alighted upon, I think, the first step that any organization should take, which is be forthcoming with what you're doing. There's no reason to hide it, to obscure it, to fear that you're saying too much. If you're just expressing in a common sense way, this is what we do with personal information, how we use it, that we delete it when we no longer need it, and that we minimize it to only that data that we need to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. If that's to provide you information, to give you a weather forecast that's dependent on your postal code, to give you information relating to your stock portfolio or the sports score from the Blue Jays victory the night before, whatever that happens to be, that's personal information. And you can facilitate it, but you have to be transparent about that. That means it has to be in a written policy that you publish. But I think even more importantly, in any kind of message that you're giving, any notice that you're giving or disclosure to the individual that speaks clearly and in understandable terms, not legalistic language, what you're trying to do.
So we've had a number of instances in the last little while where people haven't really thought about how their data has a shelf life on the internet, right? It's once something's out there, it doesn't go away. And then they're in a different phase of their life. A lot of our viewers are job seekers, and you have a digital footprint. Is there any advice you can give to those of us who need to be employed by somebody else for a living?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you, Christine. And we're finding this is more prevalent now in recruiting, in employment scenarios where human resources professionals, recruiters are using technologies now, actually. They're not manually sorting through, physical resumes. They're spidering the web, as we say, or all sorts of online sources for relevant candidates. So, even your LinkedIn profile is probably being combed through by an AI algorithm on behalf of a recruiter. And there's all sorts of potential risks with that. It's not inherently illegal to do, but there's just a right way to go about it. That's personal information too. That's information relating to your employment history, potentially compensation, records of conduct, this sort of thing. And as an employer, you have to be especially sensitive when you're carrying that information. So as an individual, what can you do? Well, first of all, know your rights. Know your rights based on where you are, where you're living and working, because it's not uniform all across the world. You should know what's protected under law. In Canada, we do have certain abilities to what we call the right to erasure or the right to delinking or de-indexing. That means an organization, upon your request, has to remove access to that information so that it's no longer accessible by AI, by any human, by any database, this sort of thing. And you're essentially private. Europe has a similar concept, and you may have heard about it in our conversations, called the right to be forgotten. But I happen to think that that's not possible. It's as you've sort of already alluded, it's not possible to be totally erased on something as vast and dispersed as the internet, where there's little packets of data all over. And there's evidence of you in various forms, nothing untoward, but there's photographs, perhaps images, references, text relating to you. That can't be deleted because nobody has the ability to erase entire parts of the internet. But what you can do is remove references to it. You can delink it or de-index it so it doesn't show up in a search or that someone doesn't actually link to it in some way. So you do have that ability as well. And then just be smart. Be smart about the personal information you're sharing. If it's someone you know and trust and they're verifiably who they say they are, then by all means share, enjoy that. But be careful of organizations that you don't know or that you're just starting to get familiar with, and be very evolutionary in how you begin that conversation. Make sure you get the comfort that you need to trust them in what you're about to engage in.
One of the things we wanted to do on this podcast is to encourage anyone who's thinking about, wanting to know more about an information privacy career or to enter an information privacy career, to take your program. Listeners will have a code that expires in January of 2026 if they want to take the next cohort of information privacy here at York University. And that code that they will enter will be Successfully IP. Thanks so much, Peter. I've really enjoyed having you on the show.
Pleasure, Christine. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Successfully Ambiguous. Be sure and subscribe to us on YouTube and listen to us on Apple and Spotify. If you've got career questions, be sure to email me at successfullyambiguous@yorku.ca.
Don't forget, when opportunity knocks, be ready to answer.